Yep.
One more. One
Another
more
two.
because I'm waiting for
Good?
Thank you, Ben.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Ben Cohen, thank you so much. Kind of not an itinerant musician, but he learned there was an audience here, and so here he is. So that's wonderful. He's going to go practice somewhere else. Welcome this afternoon. So glad that you are here. I think there are more people that probably come on their way. We had about 66 people who had registered. But here we are on a beautiful, beautiful Sunday afternoon, so I'm glad that you are here. This is the Creating Caring Communities Responding to Mental Illness. And I'm Alan Johnson. I'm part of the Interfaith Network on Mental Illness that's hosting this event. And there are some of the other board members of INME. If you just stand in the planning team committee folks. Yeah, so if you have any questions for them about INME, they're the ones to ask and talk to as well. You know, our mission started about 15 years ago, and it really began because we wanted to bring awareness about mental health, mental illness, and understanding about it for faith communities, faith leaders, members of faith communities. And then we kind of expanded that to include a wider community as well. And we've always been trying to find a way to encourage environments in which people that are actually impacted by mental illness, mental health, that indeed there's a place where they are welcomed, they are included, they are supported, and that's for most of us probably who at some point have been impacted by a mental health concern or issue. At least I know that I have, for sure. And we know that what's happening in the public media right now, I mean, where you've been reading about mental health and mental illness and what's going on, it is, according to some of the stuff that I'm reading, it's a mental health crisis. That's where we are. And how can we bring education, support, and welcome to folks who feel the stigma around mental health, mental illness, and they don't know where to go, where they can feel supported and welcomed and included. And so that's kind of what INME has been trying to do, has continued to do. And the program today for us, as we were putting this together, is really the core message of what INME is. And that is to work with faith communities particularly, but also the wider community. But the faith communities, since there is an audience there for some faith communities, And it's a context in which the language can be used, people can be acknowledged and welcomed and supported. And so that's what we're doing, and that's why I think it's probably one of the reasons why you might be here, actually, so that either your own faith community or how you're part of the faith community or a wider community here is how to create caring. And how does that happen? I mean, that's the reason I'm here. I mean, it was a faith community, actually, that really supported me when my brother died by suicide. I mean, where do you go? Where do you go to find the support? And it was a faith community through that time of wrestling my own faith, for sure, at that particular point. But where do I go in order to be heard and also to be able to speak up and speak out without the stigma, the feeling of shame or guilt? And now my adult son is living with a major mental illness and has for the last 35 years and is at a crisis point in New York City. So it's personal for me that we're here. And as we begin together, I would invite us to take some breaths. I need to, so join me. I'm going to invite you just to take 3 deep breaths, and to do it by taking inhale, inhale, and then exhale. So it's 2 times to inhale and then to exhale. Keep your eyes open, closed, whatever, and on your own pace, take 3 deep breaths. The word breath is ruha, which is life-giving energy itself. So I'm going to ask that we now pass peace with each other with a sign language. And it's pretty simple. It goes this way. Put your hands, one on top of one, and turn it over, the other one, and then peace to you. So to both receive and to offer. Let's do it one more time. It's one hand on top, and then turn it over. It's peace, and then peace to you. So turn to somebody near you, behind you, wherever, somebody across the room, whatever, and receive the peace and offer the peace. Wonderful. So I would like to introduce the person who's probably the instigator for our being here today in a very good way, and that is Rabbi Deborah Bronstein. Deborah is the emerita of Congregation Har HaShem here. She has lived in Boulder since 1994 and asked me to share that one of the blessings in her life was serving in the board. Talk to any of us that are on the board. Maybe you could be honored as well. Thank you for that, Deborah. It's great. And also add, though, that she has continued to share her wisdom and insights when she has been asked. So, Deborah, come on up. You're going to introduce our presenter. Welcome.
Okay, well, first of all, I have to say, Rabbi Cohn, I'm very sorry, but I brought my grocery list and not your introduction. But I think I know what I want to say. So first of all, I'm so pleased that Rabbi Cohn is a dear friend of mine. She is one of these brave, admirable women who has used her own struggles with mental health to help other people. She just does that all the time. And she helps communities, religious communities, become more like open-hearted and open-minded and wise about giving everyone a good home so that no one's a stranger. And I really appreciate that about her. And it's so much easier sometimes to hide, but she doesn't hide. She serves.
Good afternoon. Reading glasses. I'm sure many of you know the feeling. So, it occurred to Pooh and Piglet that they hadn't heard from Eeyore in several days, so they put on their hats and their coats, and they trotted across the 100-acre wood to Eeyore's house, and inside was Eeyore. "Hello, Eeyore," said Pooh. "Hello, Pooh. Hello, Piglet," said Eeyore in a glum-sounding voice. "We just thought we'd check on you because we haven't heard from you in a while," Piglet said, "and we wanted to see if you were okay." Eeyore was silent for a moment. "Am I okay?" he asked eventually. "Well, I just don't know, to be honest. Are any of us really okay?" That is what I said to myself. "All I can tell you, Pooh and Piglet, is that right now I feel rather sad and alone and not much fun to be around. Which is why I haven't bothered you, because you wouldn't want to waste your time hanging out with someone who was sad and alone and not much fun to be around. Would you now?" Pooh looked at Piglet, and Piglet looked at Pooh, and they sat down one on either side of Eeyore. And Eeyore looked at them in surprise. "What are you doing?" "We're sitting with you," said Pooh, "because we are your friends. And two friends don't care if someone is feeling sad or alone or not much fun to be around. True friends are there for you anyway. And so here we are." "Oh," said Eeyore. And the three of them sat in silence for a while Pooh and Piglet said nothing at all. Somehow, almost imperceptibly, Eeyore started to feel a little bit better, because Pooh and Piglet were there. No more, no less. Let me tell you a story. A few years ago, for Jewish Disabilities Awareness, Exception, and Inclusion Month, which has too many letters to count, my synagogue focused on growing up with mental health issues. This isn't the first mental health programming we had done at my synagogue. We've been doing it for years. There were 3 speakers that year, though. 2 spoke about having a mental illness as a child, and 1, my daughter, talked about her own depression, but also about growing up with me, a mama with both physical and mental health issues. I have chronic health problems. 21 years ago, I had a terrible stroke. I don't know if there's any other kind of stroke. I was left with chronic invisible illness, things like chronic fatigue, daily migraines, balance, and other vestibular issues. And your only hint as to any of these problems is when I use my cane. And that looks less and less out of place as I age. But I also have devastating mental health issues. I have bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, so many diagnoses and not enough solutions. And my stroke made these all worse, of course. And again, you don't know unless I tell. And so my daughter, in speaking to our congregation, spoke of 2 memories she has of me in the hospital. The first, after her stroke, when she was 4.5, and I gave her rides on my hospital bed so she wouldn't be scared. And the second was a different hospital memory. It was where she remembers being about 10 and making Shabbat with her Abba, her dad, and me. And she remembers blowing out the candles, which you don't do, before they left, because I was on a psych ward and they don't like fire there. Shira, my daughter, emphasized the importance of telling children, or anyone really, what is happening with an illness in the family, with age-appropriate words. And as I heard her speak, I was, of course, filled with pride, but also relief. I couldn't shield my daughter from any of my health issues, but at least she knew that it was not her fault. She seemed to know that while my illness sometimes prevented me from being the mama I wanted to be, that she still always came first. And I'm not the only parent, the only person here today with health issues that prevent us from being our best selves all the time. And you can't always tell by looking. So many of our illnesses are invisible. Being on the autism spectrum, having brain tumors, struggling with schizophrenia, having learning issues. We can look around the room and who knows who needs help and why. So how do we reach out? So the first thing we do is we name it publicly without stigma. There's no shame in having multiple sclerosis. There should be no loss of dignity in experiencing schizophrenia. After all, this is old numbers. Oh, one more. It's everywhere. Okay? 1 in 5 Americans have a diagnosed mental illness. 1 in 25 Americans in the U.S., something like 9.8 million, experience a serious mental illness in any given year that interferes with one or more major life activities. Mental health conditions, right? Mental health conditions are the leading cause of disability in the U.S. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth ages 15 to 24, the 10th leading cause of death for all Americans. 6 in 10 Americans have at least one chronic condition. And so we should then know, right, that invisible illness are all around us. It's a matter of us creating safe space for it to appear, and for us to then learn how to respond, help, and to care. So how do we provide ongoing support to those of us with problems we cannot see? Well, we need to move the narrative arc. We need a narrative arc to be one of healing and not one of cure, both for the sake of the person who's ill and those who want to help. Too often we tell the story as though it was a one-time problem. It's a parabola, if those of you who remember your math, right? What happens? You begin with a problem, you descend into crisis. The mentally ill person then seeks help. Right? We see what happens. And then from a psychiatrist or a therapist, and then after a crisis, she is cured. All done. Or perhaps he has a strange collection of symptoms. He's got headaches, insomnia, dizzy spells. He goes from doctor to doctor until one day he ends up in the ER where a brilliant young resident diagnoses the brain tumor. They remove it and he's fine. In real life, what happens? Real life, people get sick. After seeking help, she gets better. Like cancer, the disease is treated and goes into remission. For some mentally ill people, that's it. They'll stabilize on medication and treatment and be fine. Others, even those who are treatment compliant and working their buns off to stay healthy, there will be, just like cancer, a recurrence. It's true for my chronic migraine. Sometimes the medication works, then it stops working. And with each round, we hope remission, and then there's recurrence, and so on. So what gets us in the way of accepting people with illnesses? What stops us from flinging our doors open to all comers? And so often, it's fear, for both clergy and lay leaders. We fear we do not know enough about their illness in order to help. We fear we cannot fix the person with the mental illness or meet all the family's needs. We are afraid that the person is going to need more than we can give, and we won't know how to set limits. We fear saying or doing the wrong thing, and we fear the person. He may be needy and she may be off-putting. And these fears of not being enough lead us to not doing anything at all. But instead, we can make a beginning. We can accept that we can't fix those with mental illnesses. We can't solve all the problems that they may be experiencing. Then we want to think, what can we do? One of the problems of some chronic illnesses, and one which I think very few, if any, people not living with it can understand, is that your days are just so much shorter than other people's. The popular metaphor for this cycle of exhaustion and energy is called spoons. See, there they are, right? For those with a chronic condition, we don't start the day or the week with as many spoons as a healthy person might. Every activity, from writing an article or talking with a friend on the phone, takes a spoon or two. And so we have to measure out our life in teaspoons, as T.S. Eliot said. If I do X, I will not be able to do Y. And if I try to do both, and Z as well, I get bowled over with consequences. Headaches, dizziness, almost fainting when I try to stand up. So many things we'd like to do, but are costly in spoons, in energy both physical and mental. Friends need to understand that chronic illness, seen or invisible, can make people more unreliable. They may cancel at the last moment. It's not personal, it's medical. You need to sleep more. It takes much, much longer to get to sleep. You need to nap. There are periods of the day when you just can't do much. If you're ever tempted to get upset with someone who's living with a chronic illness because they don't keep in touch, they're bad with correspondence or so on, you can reframe that. Maybe even consider reaching out to them, even if you're the one who almost always has to do that. Tell them, I know you may not be able to respond immediately, or maybe at all, and I understand. This matters to people who are ill. It really does. Our goal is not to force people, so we'll stop, hold on, not to force people to disclose their illness. That's their choice. But rather to create communities that have a culture of care and welcome. What does it look like? And so, as a rabbi, I frame these with Jewish words. What are the commandments or the obligations around welcoming those with mental health issues into our communities? What midot, what values come into play when we try to help those who are hurting? When we are reminded to value those who might be a bit different but are still parts of our community, whether they are friends, family members, or ourselves. So the first is Shmirat HaLashon, to be aware of how we talk about, what words we use, what our language is. Haknesat Orchin, welcoming strangers, creating friendships. Bikor Cholim, visiting the sick. Gemilut Chasadim, doing acts of love and kindness. And Derech Eretz, walking through our lives together. The value of Shmirat HaLashon, so next one. There it is, see? Right? Is a paying attention to what you say and do. Our words and deeds can create a culture of kindness and acceptance, but we have to pay attention. The watchword in the disability community is nothing about us without us. That is to say that folks with mental illness should be included in a programming at every level, volunteering as an usher, committee member, being on the board and governance of your community. People with chronic illnesses need to be part of our community, even if they are homebound. We have to have outreach to kids, for example, with ASD. So we have adults with autism. Ask adults with autism what kind of things we can do that would be helpful. Person first. Many people who have chronic illnesses, who have learning differences, who have a mental illness, and so on. Person first means our language. I am a woman with bipolar disorder, rather than I'm bipolar, right? Reflects what we hold dear, that we are all created in the divine image. Calling someone borderline reduces her to a disease, rather than a person first, last, and always. Words can hurt, but they can also heal. When we named my daughter Shira Michal, we chose a name that we loved. This is why I never yelled at her using her whole name, right? Rather, I chose to use that name with love. Shira Michali, come on. So too with naming our conditions, our difficulties, our illnesses, our struggles. It might help to know that a certain person has reading difficulties, if that means we can help, for example, to help her find the place in the prayer book or here. An accurate diagnosis can be a gift. Now we know what the issue is and we can begin to solve it. And we should not dismiss people by name calling. He's so obsessive. And we want to watch our casual speech. I'm manic. Or, well, he just has OCD. Just as we no longer call those with developmental difficulties retarded, and we don't call people who use a wheelchair crippled, it pays to guard our tongue. And finally, everybody brings something to the table. It's easy to dismiss someone who seems crazy or not so bright, right? But people all have gifts that we need to learn from one another. At times when we're uncomfortable, we might just see the disability. Yes, it's wonderful that a congregant in a wheelchair comes to service regularly, but he doesn't need your pity, probably doesn't need much help either. Look beyond the wheelchair. Look beyond the stick of a woman who's blind. Look into neurodiversity and find the nefesh, the soul inside. The next mitzvah, the next commandment, is of welcoming strangers. Synagogues can reach out, and churches and mosques and temples and all of them can reach out to a diverse polity in ways large and small. Being wheelchair accessible, having Braille on bathroom and other signages isn't just helpful for the populations that these accommodations serve. They point beyond that concrete to a larger commitment. At this community, all sorts of people are welcome. We want to make it clear that we are aware of illness and mental illness in our communities, and that we accept it as part of whatever normal life experience might be. As such, congregations and community organizations can do things like, one more, right? Okay, and one more, up to the non-obvious, right? Okay, so you can, for example, work with the UCC, United Church of Christ's WISE, their mental health network. Their goals for congregations of all religions are to become wise, welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged. Congregations can each create their own breach, their own covenant, discussing how your community can best commit to these basic values. My home synagogue in Denver and both Har HaShem and Bonei Shalom here in Boulder are the first 3 synagogues to become part of this network. There's a sample of a covenant on the handouts out there. So if you're bored, you can get one and read it. Right? Having mental health resources available online and in person can be helpful. You might, for example, have business cards from your local NAMI, postcards with a QR code that sends the user to a research guide. Being able to access help privately and discreetly, it might help people to get the help they need without feeling shame. We are, in fact, sharing a mental health resource guide out in the community, and I know my synagogue at home, Rodef Shalom, in a pull-down menu has a list of mental health resources in the community. Also good ways for people to find what they need. All right? Okay, so you want to remember, perfect, that you can't see everything that's going on. There are all sorts of invisible diagnoses: chronic depression, chronic migraines. We shouldn't assume a blind person is incompetent, but we also shouldn't assume that the person in front of us is not having any kind of struggles just because I'm not using my cane. Be gentle. You can ask the person if there seems to be an issue. And finally, we want to be proactive. We want to open doors to people, even before we're asked. Rather than assuming, for example, that you know someone's gender or sexual identity just by looking, right? That is, until we're told otherwise, we assume people identify as cisgender and heterosexual. Instead, we can actually ask. On memberships forms, you can ask for a spouse or partner's name instead of assuming it's a husband and wife. Children to religious school come of age, we should ask them what pronouns they want to use and what sorts of celebrations they want to have. There's, in fact, a non-binary Hebrew program out there designed to be able to open options to all sorts of kids as they reach their 13th birthday and become members of the adult Jewish community. So then there's all sorts of things that we can do. So let's see, all sorts of resources that we have out there, and I'm not going to read them to you because we have them out there. The mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, of visiting the sick and caring for the sick. People with chronic conditions might be gone for a class for a while due to treatment issues. We can welcome them back with care, no matter what kind of illness it was. If we can be as accepting and matter-of-fact about mental health issues as we are about physical issues, that would go a long way to helping people be more open about their own life stories. That would, in turn, reduce stigma and perhaps encourage more folks to come forward and get help with whatever struggles they are experiencing. The rabbis taught, that is, the sages of old, when one performs the commandment of Bikur Cholim, of visiting the sick, you remove 1/60th of the illness. This is the smallest significant amount in the rabbinic imagination. There is great wisdom here. It is not our job to heal someone with an illness or to fix all the problems of a family member. Rather, the teaching reminds us, simply being with the person where she is in her suffering, it matters. Next. So what can we do in our houses of worship? We want to make space in our prayers for everyone. We want to mention mental health struggles along with physical illness whenever we do prayers for healing. We have in the Hebrew the words already there. We ask for refuat nefesh, refuat haguf, refuat shlema, a healing of the body, a healing of the spirit, a healing of completeness, a total healing. We should be explicit in our congregations so that we can normalize illnesses that now have stigma and make them become a normal part of what it is to be human. Pay attention also, look around, right? Have regular adult ed students or religious school kids, fellow congregants suddenly just disappeared? Let's go after them with a call or a text to see what's going on, to see if we can help. Reaching out opens doors. It tells people that they're valuable and we miss them. And we can ask if we can help. We can use open language, not just, are you sick, but rather, is there something going on? What can I do? What can my house of worship do to help you through whatever is going on? And you don't have to be perfect and in perfect health to be with us. Those with mental illnesses especially often have a hard time knowing what kind of help they might need. Depression, anxiety, psychosis, these prevent people from being able to analyze what might actually help. Their families are as overwhelmed as families dealing with cancer. Plus, there's the stigma. So as clergy people and as caring communities, or as anyone in our communities, we have to go that extra step and offer concrete suggestions of help, how we can help, rather than just saying, what can I do? Strategies, of course, work for all sorts of illnesses. So, for example, a regular short call to check in. It shows that the ill person, the family, that they still matter, even if they can't make it here to communal activities right now. Concrete offer of help. There you go, see? For example, do you want me to call you tonight and hang out for a while? Or I'm going to the grocery store. Text me your list and I'll get the good produce for you. As we emerge from the pandemic and become more widely vaccinated, offering in-person help is valuable. You can help someone with laundry or their dishes. It might feel like a small thing for you to do, but for the person who needs the help, they can be overwhelming kindness. And it also helps an isolated person rejoin a community. An actual in-person visit means so much, as we now know. All of us have been stressed and hurt by the isolation of COVID. As the weather warms and the vaccines increase in scope again and again, we can begin to be together. Eating a meal on someone's purse, properly distanced, of course, sitting on their porch, or taking a walk together, they are so healing. A regular email. Once again, it makes a family and the mentally ill person feel cared about, takes very little time and energy on my part. And finally, offering meals and rides just as we would for any other kind of illness. Sometimes folks with mental illness or chronic challenges act in ways that are puzzling. It makes it hard for others to know how to respond, even though we would like to welcome them and be present. So here are some suggestions. There we go. Next. All right. So we'll stay there for a second. Here we go. So someone's withdrawing into themselves. Offer conversation about even simple things like, the weather or the Broncos. That can help a person interact. A person who's overstimulated might need the opposite, just a calm, silent presence from you. Some folks are not so good with boundaries. When someone's overly needy or asking for too much, it's our role both to accept them as they are and set our own limits for our own sakes. Limit setting. I can come visit only for about a half an hour. It allows us to have the energy to return again later. When a person is fearful or insecure, your calm presence, accepting her, reminding her she's welcome and safe, can be a lifeline. When someone is in a lot of pain, is depressed, we can just hang out there being a calm presence. And if you're with someone who is actively suicidal or is threatening self-harm, this is beyond your pay grade. It's your job to get help. Help them get help. Whether you're calling 988, which is the suicide prevention hotline, or 911 to get them to a hospital before something happens. So Okay, yeah, I've completely lost track of where we are here. Yeah, sorry. What can I tell you? Okay, we're going to go all the way through that. Gimilut Chasadim, deeds of loving kindness, and finally we come to the mitzvah of derech. So this is what I just said, right? Okay, so here we go. This is the right way to act or treat others as we want to be treated. Derech eretz. It overlaps with all these other values. We want to welcome people who are sick and their families. We want them to go beyond seeing them as ill and reach out to them as members of our community who happen to have a distinct set of needs. Derech eretz calls on us to be truly present with our fellow members and congregants when they're ill or in need. And this is what we were saying. So you should, for example, strive to be what the shrinks among us called a non-anxious presence. That is to say, you're there to listen to the person, but not to solve all their problems. You want to remain open, calm, and available. Gentle curiosity can be helpful. You don't need to know everything there is to know about a person's illness or a family member's experience. You can ask gentle questions such as, how is that for you? That sounds tough. I don't know much about schizoaffective disorder. Would you like to tell me more? Tell me about it can help the person feel heard, and it sounds also like you want to hear more. An attitude of caring. People will, in fact, forgive us from saying all sorts of foolish things if they know that we have an underlying sense of concern and value of them. Less is often more. Be comfortable sitting together in silence. Being there in person is wonderful, as opposed to a text or a Snapchat. Actual human presence, we know, is more healing. And finally, as I said before, clear limits. Folks with mental illnesses sometimes don't have a good sense of boundary, and it's up what's appropriate, and they may ask us for more than we can give, and it's okay to say, no, I can't do that. So remember that we are here for care and not a cure. This is not a TV show with a solution and happy endings in 45 minutes. It is real life, and it takes time. You can't fix your friend, but you can be a friend. You can help them and stay a friend, as they say, through thick and thin. You can let them know that you see them as your friend, as a person, not a disease, not as someone less than, not as something shameful. You can learn to be present for one another. You can learn to see, one might say, the image of God in one another. So we want to work to make our communities send that message explicitly and implicitly in our speech. All right, one more. One more. There it is. Little Calvin and Hobbes for us. We are all created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. All we have to really do is look at one another and see other people's souls shining out from underneath. Finally, I want to share a prayer that the prayer book my synagogue uses from Lev Shalem. It says, what happens when you're not doing well and finding it hard to be close to God? And here's the prayer they offer. Master of the universe, see the sadness in my soul. Heal my grief and despair. I wish to do your will, but sadness overwhelms me. Let your instruction touch my being, that I might find comfort in the world you have created, and that I might in turn be a comfort to others. May the soul you have given me the strength to turn sadness into joy and despair into song. Master of the universe, send healing. Thank you. And we all know the real reason that you're all pleased is because I brought the musician with me. If you're bored, also he's like downstairs somewhere with his accordion. It is now 12:40. So, are there questions, comments, arguments, rebuttals?
Again, this is thank yourself for being here and letting us know who you are and the wisdom and experience. So this is a tremendous time right now for some comments, responses, questions. Obviously, Rabbi Sandy is open to anything that you want to ask her. So I can walk around with a mic, whatever you'd like to do, or you can stand up and speak where you are. So she's here, and we're ready to hear from you.
Well.
How would we get a copy of the prayer?
Oh, how would you get a copy of the prayer, she asked. And you know what? If Alan sends me a tickler, I will send it out to him to send to Imni.
Thank you.
You betcha. You betcha. It's a good prayer, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Really. I will share, by the way, something else, which is that my community, I kind of founded on my own without really trepping in appropriately with my congregational rabbi, a mental health committee several years ago. And it has proved surprisingly useful, both in doing programming during mental health, like doing Mental Illness Month or whatever that is in May, doing other kinds of programming, and small stuff like creating a mental health resource list to be put on our website, or our caring committee sends new baby baskets for families with, well, new babies, right? And we're going to begin to do a couple of things. We're going to be putting in, for example, a pamphlet on postpartum depression into the basket. And then also, through the synagogue administrators of the system, this is what I'm hoping, is that they're going to give me a tickler so that I can check in with mom 10 or 12 or 14 weeks later to see how the family is doing and how she's doing. Because often there's a lot of, for example, excitement right about when the baby's born, but by the time the baby blues come along or postpartum depression, the community isn't paying attention anymore. The other thing I would say about that, too, is that people often, I had been in therapy for years before I had a baby, and I didn't notice that I was depressed. And I was profoundly depressed after I had this beautiful, perfect child, right? And it took someone outside of me to say, I think you need some help. Here's a reference. Here's a referral. The baby's almost 26, and I'm in therapy with the same therapist, so that's going well. We're just getting to know each other. Right, so they're those kind of practical small pieces can be really, really helpful, which is to say we can be helpful. And the model of a new baby can be really useful as well, right? So when you go visit the family with a brand new baby, what do? You hold the baby so mom can take a shower, right? You put a load of laundry in, and you leave a casserole and you go home, right? Nobody expects that you're going to make that baby sleep through the night, right? And so that model for people experiencing other kinds of illnesses is helpful too. You're not going to fix it, but you can go, put in a load of laundry, hang out with someone for half an hour, and leave behind a kugel. And that could be really helpful, even if it doesn't fix what's going on. Oh, I'm sorry, a egg noodle pudding kind of thing, yeah. Whatever. When I had my stroke, my congregation overwhelmed us with lasagnas. Like more lasagnas than possible, and my daughter, who has always been a very, very good eater, as opposed to me, I'm picky, still doesn't eat lasagna because we think she associates it with trauma, right? She was 4.5, her mom had a stroke, and all we had was lasagna. So try to go on a limb when you're figuring out what to make people. Although they froze well, so there was that. Comments, questions, rebuttals? Oh, good, yes. You.
Can't imagine everything, all the obstacles and hurdles that you've had to deal with to be the person that you are today and to be the
Thank you.
I came here because I have a 26-year-old son who's struggling with mental illness. And
Can you put it here, okay?
no.
No, that's what I thought. Please, I'm not sure what you're saying.
Or you can
Maybe
come
you
here.
can bring the mic, or you can come here, either one.
This is your Phil Dime.
Okay. Whoop. So I have a 26-year-old son who's struggling with mental illness, and he's unable to work at the moment. And I've been thinking of volunteer opportunities, and I thought, gosh, it'd be really great if there are some organizations who are open to that, volunteers for individuals who might need a little extra, I don't know, compassion for something they might be going on that, again, is unseen. So I came for some ideas about that. I was actually thinking maybe of horse equine therapy places where maybe he could go and be around the horses. Yeah.
I was going to say, A Precious Child in Broomfield is an excellent place to volunteer because they are well organized. A Precious Child is an organization that helps people in the cracks of poverty, like where they're helping them with needs that they have that fall between the cracks of what government could provide or what they can provide on their own. Such things like tutoring, after-school tutoring, clothing, job skills training, that kind of thing. But they are very well organized. They're very accepting. It's very easy to volunteer there. And they work at all levels. So, and it's in Broomfield.
We can all also turn, just to say the obvious, right? NAMI, and there's a NAMI chapter here in Boulder, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, not only offers groups, kind of support groups, both for those with mental illnesses and for their families, and I would recommend getting in touch with them. Their family program is fabulous, but they do a really nice modeling of how to accommodate people who have disabilities, especially mental health disabilities, kind of counting on them when they can be counted on and letting you withdraw when you can't do it. But I think there are also a lot of animal shelters that are pretty good about it. I know I used to volunteer with my daughter at the Max Fund, which is in Denver. It's not very convenient for you. But right, some of these places that do therapies, some of the places, even hospitals that do visiting stuff, you can find help doing that. But working with animals is a great place to start because it's healing, maybe helpful for the animal, but it may also be healing for your son. And I would also say go to your house of worship and see if there's stuff that needs doing. Anything from working in the religious school to being the person who helps set up the coffee hour. And there's sort of an immediate gratification of that, right? Look, I put out all the cookies and people came and ate them. That was a success. And I know for me, especially when I'm really struggling, small successes are really helpful because I'm not having the big ones. And we do, of course, have snack, you'll notice out there. Now I'm making it worse.
Thank you. The example of the 3 congregations in our Front Range that have become part of WISE congregations, could you describe how that took place in an interfaith way? And are there special challenges to that? But especially, how did it come about to style an interfaith association that way?
All right, Bonnie.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Leaf, and I am the chairperson for the Disability Awareness and Inclusion Committee here at Har HaShem, and we were the first organization to become WISE through UCC. We worked with a mentor through UCC who sent a lot of examples, and they have rules and qualifications and everything, and she sent all that. And then she said, you can use some of these and make it your own. And so we met as a committee, and we put together all the information. And Har HaShem had already been doing a lot of the things required for this. And then they approved us, and they gave us a plaque and a certificate. And then through Jewish Disability Advocates, of which Har HaShem belongs, then Bonei Shalom became a member, and Rodef Shalom became a member. Does that answer your question?
And further, they said out in the lobby, we have both on how to get involved with WISE and a sample, right?
Yes. And I would just add that it's very fine to be sneaky. So I knew that our speaker at the annual meeting was going to talk about how to become a WISE congregation. And so I asked members of our inclusion committee to attend, and it was like, they just swallowed it up, and it's been so great for our congregation.
The values in a WISE congregation are welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged. When my congregation wanted to do this, we have both an inclusion committee and a separate mental health community, because as I said, I kind of just founded one and found some people to go along with me. We took the example of Har HaShem's, actually, and we tweaked it. So I put in some Hebrew words to make it sound more Jewish, and the board couldn't have been happier to approve us. I mean, just were delighted. And I think that they were delighted, but not just by the ideas included, and we also have been doing a lot of stuff, but the idea that somebody in our synagogue was kind of seizing hold of this and going forward with it. So I think sneaky is exactly a good way to go. You gather people together from your congregation who are interested in this. You look at some of the literature out in the lobby and go, ooh, we can do this. And then, you kind of send a copy to the minister and say, do you mind if I present this to the board? And what are they going to say? No, we hate mentally ill people here. But the process of doing it is really useful to kind of figure out what steps we want to take next. And they don't have to be big steps. They can be little steps, right? If you have the National Suicide Hotline out on business cards in your lobby, when people walk in, they can sneak them in their pocket and go home and have them. It doesn't take a lot of effort for us to do it. It can be really helpful for people who need it. We are at 2:52, which means...
If there's any other comments, this is good because we want to have Q&A.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative and humorous, too. Yeah, humor works very well. As a mental health professional, since the pandemic, I have seen so many people with grief issues. And I think in this society, and particularly in Boulder County, we need more help in that area of grief, because we still don't know as a society how to allow our feelings to just be present with whatever's happening. And I know I went into a huge grieving situation when my husband of 43 years of marriage passed almost 2 years ago. And what sustained me the most, besides my spiritual beliefs, was the notion that everything happens for me rather than to me. And that really helped me with the grieving process, allowing me to look at that more deeply in my inner landscape. And what is the lesson? What is happening? Why is this happening for me rather than to me? So, it moved me out of feeling victimized. Yeah.
I'm sorry for your loss. I will say that, and I'm a clergy person, but I am pretty reluctant to lead someone into various theologies unless they want to take me there first. Right? Because what feels really healing and comforting and surrounding and supportive to one person feels really terrible to somebody else. I will say that after I had my stroke, I got a lot of really nice cards and letters, get well stuff, which was lovely. And I got like 3 or 4 of them that wrote to me to tell me what it was that I had done wrong, and this is why God was punishing me, which I thought was just an interesting take. Like, why would you write that to someone, even if you're thinking it? And I think that that can be true around this too, right? When people are grieving, what you want to figure out is, well, what would be, right? For some people, it feels like, oh, this happened because God wanted it to. And other people feel like this was a really random whatever. And God is just like someone who hangs out with me that gets me through these tough. People frame their things theologically in a variety of different ways. And I think being open to that is really helpful. I do teach a class for Jews with a text on visiting the sick, Bikor Cholim. And we look at Jewish texts about it and then talk about the concreteness of it. But I generally call it visiting the sick, what to say and what not to say. And the first thing we do is go around the room and say, what's the worst thing someone's ever said to you when you were sick? And people say amazing things, just really remarkable things that sound like they're helpful and are not. And so, I mean, I guess what I would reflect back is what we wanted to be able to kind of listen in that way and listen to you talk about how you understand this, and then how can I support that, rather than me saying to you, this is how you should believe, because I'm not God, and so I can't really speak for exactly how God does stuff. But I do want to be in relationship with God, and figuring out how to do that is its own, sometimes very easy and sometimes difficult. How about that? It's now 2:57, so we're going to take a moment, yes, and you can go have snack. We're going to ask that you not bring food or liquids back into the sanctuary, because this is the sanctuary, and it's hard to get off the floor. And we'll be back in about 5 minutes. 10. All right, 10 minutes. Go to it. There are Girl Scout cookies out there, folks. Yeah. See?
So there's a secret about the microphones. You have to be pretty close to them before they pick you up.
Okay, and so they move, so they'll break.
Yeah, we're actually going to have this one handed back and forth. But you can use that one. You're sitting there?
Yeah.
These folks in the middle are going to share.
Okay, they're the sharers. I'm the one who gets the. Get really close like this?
Yeah?
Like just,
Yeah, you hear yourself?
yes, just
Yeah.
so close.
Gosh, Rudy.
All right,
those
so
your
these are the
opening
questions. And you've got them there, so.
Are those your opening words?
It's my,
Yeah, these are all the handouts from our support group that
wow.
Rabbi Bronstein and I have been doing for a couple of years. So I brought that folder because it's got some amazing stuff in it.
Oh, great.
All right. There's, I brought some
Okay.
cough drops. In this day and age of COVID. You don't want to cough.
Okay.
Even a little
I
bit.
really want to send. I don't know.
The truth. How about that?
Probably we're going to want this.
Tell us the
Okay,
truth.
start with the truth.
All right. A revelation. No, that's correct. Good idea.
Didn't know you're on the InMe board, Rich. That's lovely.
So you and Ann are going to share that microphone, and then we're also going to use that to go out and ask questions. So when your answer, I'm going to take the mic, so then you and Ann may have to figure out how to share this one microphone.
I left business cards out front. If people want to contact me, they're welcome to.
Okay,
So, which is why I left the business cards up in the lobby.
all right. Sure.
Hello, Anne.
And how would you like to be addressed? Can I use first names? Is that?
Lydia is fine.
Okay. I'm rich. Someday I'll have some money, but that's what they call me now.
I got a nickname in medical school.
Uh-oh.
Dr. Universe.
Oh, my.
Or you were
Was
lost.
that?
We
Was
were
that?
stoned at the time.
I was going to say, that doesn't sound complimentary necessarily.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, those who are here, which is good. So I want to introduce you to our moderator, Rich Williams. Rich is a psychotherapist. He's an ordained chaplain and pastor of Mesa Vista Fellowship that meets in a nursing home that caters to residents with behavioral issues and major mental illnesses. Rich also has a private practice in Broomfield, and will introduce our wonderful panel members.
All right, thank you. All right. It's always funny to see a congregation or a group of people and how there must be some power up here. Is that what it is? You're afraid to get burned? Or please feel free to come up. Some of this, our question and answer is probably going to be done conversationally, and so it might be nice if you were a little closer. It would be easier to get the microphone to you and so forth. And I know I can't force you to come up, but all right. Just a couple of little notes. Out at the front desk is Rabbi Cohen's business card. So if you want to get in touch with her, they're out there to gather. There's also a resource list, one from her synagogue, and then there's one that INME created. The one from INME we're happy to send for you to put on the website for your church or whatever. So they're the one. Yeah. Okay. Exactly. You'd have to take the Rodef Shalom off, but you can do that. All right. Anything else that we should? Okay. So this panel is intended to provide some additional depth to Rabbi Cohen's presentation. I don't know that that's possible, but we're going to try to do that. And we have 3 panelists working in different ways and with different perspectives on mental health and well-being for our congregations and the community that the larger community that we all reside in. And we'll do this as a discussion among the panelists. I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then they'll have a few minutes to say something about themselves and their experience of mental health in the world or in this community. And then we'll be working with some questions and, like I was a talk show host or something, if you can imagine. And we'll end our time to expand the questions that we're talking about to the ones that you'd like to bring to us, okay? So that'll hopefully be conversational. You'll feel like you can interject and make comments and especially questions. So our 3 panelists, in short, are Reverend Lydia Ferrante Roseberry of the Boulder Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, Ann Weir, PhD of the First Congregational Church of Boulder, and Dr. Judd Shapiro of Congregation Har HaShem. So let's welcome them with some applause. And then allow me a minute to introduce them, and then they'll have a chance to let you know more about them. So Reverend Ferrante Roseberry has been leading her church as they advocate in our community here in Boulder, and is a consumer of mental health services for her family. And in addition, she volunteers with Together Colorado, which is a community organizing group. And mental health and access to services, mental health services, is one of the priorities of that group. And so Reverend Ferrante Roseberry, or Lydia, will offer these perspectives. And Ann Weir, PhD, is a member of the First Congregational Church of Boulder, UCC, and is a consumer of mental health services herself in Boulder. And she also supports mental health projects at her church, and she'll offer those perspectives. And Dr. Judd Shapiro, MD, is a psychiatrist and a mental health provider in a local mental health agency. He also leads a mental health support group for this congregation, Congregation Har HaShem. And Dr. Shapiro will offer some perspectives about that. So, Judd, would you like to tell us a little more about your...
Sure. I can do this one. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, hi, welcome. So my first thought about all this, well, first a little background. So I was trained in the whole medical perspective and been a medical practitioner for some 45 years. But it turns out that dealing with mental illness, we're in a relatively primitive stage of development in the mental health universe. And yes, we have some symptom relief, but we don't have anything that's very curative. So I think it's much more useful to come from the spiritual perspective. And being a psychiatrist, I'm going to talk about spirituality and not medicine here. So the first bottom line is to look at other people, to experience other people, to be with other people as an us and not a them. And we are all more alike than we are different. And that's where you start from when you're working with somebody. How can I resonate with you? How can I connect with you? What do you like? Do you like vanilla or do you like chocolate? What's it like growing up? And to make some kind of a connection to your experiences in life. Because it turns out that we all, including me, have our own mental health challenges. And there are times that I've been depressed or I've been lonely, and other confusion or not understanding what's going on in the culture that I happen to be in, or I've been a beginner. And I like to think of myself as a beginner in general, because then you can take on new things when you're a beginner. So in some ways, I don't like being an MD because you're supposed to be an expert and you're supposed to know it all. And that gets you into trouble, especially when you're working with somebody or trying to deal with mental illness, because not only are we a we and us, but we're also individuals, and we all have our own sort of quirks and abilities and disabilities. And it turns out that mental illness in general is an exaggeration of things that happen to everybody. Loneliness can turn into depression, or being anxious when you're sitting in front of a bunch of people trying to talk can be a clue of what having an anxiety disorder is like. So most people with mental illness, quote, have an exaggeration of things that we all feel off and on, and sometimes are problems in our own lives. And that's a place to start with when you are working with somebody who has some trouble going on and some kind of a disability. So when people ask you what your pronoun is, are you a they, are you a he, are you a she, I always want to be an us and a we, but nobody ever lets me do that as my pronoun. And so I'm going to put that on the bottom of my little card that is we or us. And that's how you get through some of the barrier of sort of not understanding what's going on with somebody else. So there's being curious is more useful than having the answer, and wanting to find out what's going on here, and how is this person like me, or how are they unlike me, or how do they think, or so that's a wonderful attitude to have when you're trying to be helpful with somebody, is just being curious of what's going on and what is this and how does it feel, and how are you doing with it, and then you take it from there to how can I be helpful, or what do we think might be useful with that. So there's the medical model for you.
All right. Ann?
So when Dr. Shapiro, or whom I called Jed, was talking, I was reminded of the very first time I was hospitalized with a psychotic episode, and Jesus came to visit me. Now, this was many years ago, more than I will tell you, because I tell a lot about myself, but I don't tell my age, at least at this point. We'll see what happens. Anyway, and that was part of the craziness. Nobody thought that it could have any kind of spiritual connection. And I worked with support groups for a long time, and then became a member of First Congregational Church, mostly because we have a mental health ministry. And when we had founded a support group there for people with mental illness and their families, and we have a group, what I call a mixed group, so that if you're a family member, you can come. If you're a consumer, I don't know what the name is right now, but anyway, you can also come. And I realized that for me, not having a spiritual component as part of my journey of living with my mental illness was a loss. And I was at a conference several years ago, and they were talking about the spirituality being the third leg of a stool in treatment for mental illness. And that I hold that image in my mind, that yes, medications help me a lot. Support, community support is really important, but that spiritual component helps me through some really hard days and nights. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Aaron. Lydia?
Oh, I've got my own mic here.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thank you to Jed and Ann and Rich. I just want to start with gratitude, actually. Just to have people here talking about mental health or mental illness, their own mental illness or that of their families, is this in and of itself is a healing activity. So I want to remind us of that and just start with the gratitude that I have to be in a community where people do that. And thank you, Alan, for starting in me all those years ago. So, our congregation's journey into mental health started with from the side door. Actually, we were doing. This is much better. Oh my gosh, we were doing community organizing through Together Colorado, as Rich mentioned. And we were looking at healthcare issues. And the way the model goes is after you're done with or health insurance actually, after you're done going through one issue and creating some change, then you do another round of listening sessions. And so they did, 40, 50, one-to-one conversations with people, probably a dozen years ago. And the organizer came to me and she said, I got to tell you what's coming up in people's lives. It's not health care, it's not housing, it's mental health. It's mental illness that people are really struggling with. And she said, before they go further, I want to just make sure you know that that's what's happening. And if you're okay with opening this up, it's opening up something new. And I said, of course I was. And it transformed our congregation. Because those listening sessions, individual, turned into listening circles where people started to tell their stories. And then they turned into what action, what's the issue that people are struggling with that most gets in their way systemically, from the system perspective. And we worked on that. We got navigators into mental health programs. We got money from, did a lot of organizing around that. I think it's called ARPA. It was the big money that came from the federal government post-pandemic. And the county, through our advocacy and organizing, moved a lot of it into mental health services. So all that was going on. But at the same time, the check-ins that we have before meetings really shifted. It used to be like, oh, I'm so busy at work, and, the kids have soccer, to I'm starting a new antidepressant now, so if I'm a little bit off tonight, that's probably what it is. So we just kind of plunged into a depth of being with one another in a more authentic way that happened because we were able to take the cap off of people's private pain and make it a public. It's a public pain because there's systemic issues, and it's an intimate private pain because people who are dealing with this in their own lives can be going through pretty challenging situations for themselves or if they're a family member. So for me, I have a family member with significant mental health issues. I loved it recurs, it's like, oh, things are going well. Oh, today they're not, right? And when my family is in one of those moments, what gives me hope is that I know that there is a group of people out there organizing so that there will be more hope, more services, more acceptance, more of everything for people, including my family, but for all the people who come after me. So.
Very good. All right. Why don't we start with our first question for the panelists. What kind of things can be done in our faith communities to support those with mental health challenges and their caregivers? Anybody want to start with that one?
Sure.
Okay. Jeff?
Well, besides having an inclusion committee and disability committee, which Bonnie has talked about, which addresses some of those issues on a congregational kind of level, there are 2 support groups that Rabbi Bronstein is running, which I'm co-leader with her with one of them. And those are a forum for people to be themselves, basically, and open up about what's going on. And find a safe place to relate to other people. So this group that Rabbi Bronstein and I have been running, which is a wonderful, I find it supportive kind of group also, called Refuat HaNefesh, which means healing of the spirit. And it's basically oriented towards acceptance and connection and feeling like you have somebody who really takes you the way you are. Makes a real difference, I think, in the lives of the folks who come. And it's open to people who have emotional problems or family members. And we asked these folks, what would it be good to tell the rest of the world about? And they said that, a quote, teaching spiritual recovery is teaching emotional recovery. And that's a direct quote from someone in the group. And that means appreciating other people, appreciating life, appreciating relationships, appreciating nature, that it's not just a recovery from mental illness, it's beyond that. It's making a connection with other people that feel solid and supportive. It's the sort of opposite of going it alone. And it's being part of a healing culture that is among the folks in that group. Another person made a distinction between the NAMI support group, which she was a member of, which is more medically oriented and medication oriented and healing oriented, that the spiritual support group that we run is more related to connecting and making a down-to-earth human connection with other people, and that dimension, as you were saying, makes as much of a difference as antidepressants probably. So that's something that can be done.
All right. Yeah. Anne? Well, a lot of what I want to say echoes what Dr. Shapiro just said, but you can't negate the power of community. That is so important. When the support group that we've been having at First Congregational, when the pandemic hit, we went to Zoom, like probably everybody else, and we are still going on Zoom because we have people from all over the country coming to our support group. And it says, first of all, to me, something about the need that, there just aren't many support groups out there. And then, as Dr. Shapiro just said, we have built a really strong sense of community, even though most people have never met other people in person. And one big thing that I think goes on at my church is often we talk about, and it's what Rabbi Cohn said, to talk about, to include people with mental health challenges in the prayers for the people, or whatever you call that. But I want to just say, I don't want to focus on the negative, but the reality is the stigma around mental illness is huge. And I know I've had people in my congregation come up to me and say, I don't want to join your mental health ministry because I'm afraid people will think I have mental health problems myself. I see some people smiling. And I don't want to get that label. So I think that is a huge issue. And we have tried to address that through educational programs, but it's difficult. It's difficult to overcome.
Lydia?
Oh, I keep wanting to grab that one.
Well, you can have it too. You want to?
It all works the same way.
I'll go double, two-fisted. I really appreciate what you said about the power of support groups. That's something our congregation has done in over this period of time. We've been in small. They've come together and then they don't stay together and then they come together. And the spiritual support groups. We've had meditation, mental health groups that started with meditation and things like that. I think there's also, in addition to that, something about belonging to a group that is multifaceted, where you can feel fully welcome. And that's where I also think congregations play such a huge role. So when, someone can come in and not only be the person with whatever their mental health illness is, but also be the person who helps with whatever other pieces, that part about inclusion in all of congregational life that you said. And that normalizing it feels so important. And you gave me some tips also, thank you. Say ding. And then the direct service part of it is really showing up. When you hear somebody's having a mental health illness, you do make the call. And I'm always reminding our pastoral care associates, it doesn't matter if they don't call back necessarily. Like, what you take care of your side of the street, and you do the outreach. You cannot control what other people do, but we can respond in a loving way to people. Oh, it's not that it doesn't matter if they don't call back. It's like, don't take it personally. That's really what I want people to like. Don't take it personally if someone doesn't call you back. Just keep putting your hand out there.
You have something to add, Jen?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
So I have a kind of radical idea that I don't know if it's ever been done, but I could imagine each congregation asking who in the congregation is willing to come forward and be part of a resource committee, and to recognize that there are professionals in every congregation, and to be willing to make themselves known as part of a resource committee or a support team, and not to be professional, not to take on curing mental illness, but to be a resource. And both professionals and non-professionals could volunteer to have their names be public, not to be caretakers or therapists, but to be resources and know what's going on in Boulder or other communities in terms of mental health resources and who would be a good connection, and are willing to be called on to help figure out what to do with a particular person who's got issues. So, radical idea.
Okay. Have you folks found barriers, both in the community and in congregations, to either implementing these or in presenting oneself as a person who is interested in mental well-being and spiritual well-being? And how have you dealt with those, perhaps?
I can share first this time. Sure. We'll just move it. We'll move it around.
Yeah.
Certainly, as people said, the ongoing stigma. Do as we can to really make it a public conversation. It's hard. It's just hard on people, and the stigma is just something to be constantly aware of and constantly trying to open up. The other thing is it takes more time, and we live in a very, very busy culture. And so just helping people to slow down as a religious leader, it's like just helping people to slow down and to do what's important on that one-to-one level can be hard. It's a barrier. Mm-hmm. And finally, we do have, sometimes people end up in what we might consider a high need category. And so setting those boundaries, figuring out what's ours to do. I'm constantly telling my folks, like, what's ours to do? We're a faith community, right? And there's moments where we reach out in a crisis, or there's moments where we wrap ourselves around somebody, but we can't sustain that for, years. And so to really be attentive to not fall into a work of a social worker or a case manager. There's times in our congregation where we've gotten a team of people around somebody where we're like, okay, here's the team of 6, and y'all already have had a relationship with this person, so can you kind of take that on behalf of the congregation in particular ways to really support somebody? So that's
and do you create that on an ad hoc basis?
Ad hoc basis.
Okay, so
yeah.
you don't have a standing.
No, we
community
look
of
like if
support.
there's somebody who starts to present as a really high need
Mm-hmm.
a person in our congregation, we look around where are there natural networks of people, and then I'll have conversations and say, would you be willing to be a team of a network of people for that person? Because as we know, it comes and goes, and so when the needs are really high. And if it's a team, then you've got somebody's like, well, I'm on vacation, or I'm really burnt out from working with this person in another way. And we just have to take care of ourselves. So,
Great. Ann or Jed?
Our congregation actually initiated the WISE covenant, and I felt at that time our congregation was really knowledgeable because we were trying to get them to buy into this covenant. But, time has gone by, so I think education needs to be there on a continual basis. And one thing that I do think makes a difference is adding mental health or mental health challenges in the prayers, but just letting people know that, there are a lot of us in their midst who are dealing with mental health challenges. So I think ongoing education can be a real barrier because congregations change over time.
I think that's one of the hottest issues in the mental health universe. About 1/3 of mental illnesses are about a one-time episode and people get over it and go back to recovery, and about 1/3 are episodic and are off and on, and about 1/3 of mental illness issues are chronic and pretty much there most of the time, even though there's come and go. And the medical model, for sure, does not want to recognize that. Even in the mental health world, where that's known, and you ask almost any therapist, and they'll agree that it can go on forever. But there's a real strong medical ethic of what at the University of Maryland. When I went to medical school, it used to be called treat 'em and street 'em. And in the city hospital, the idea was to fix people up as fast as you could and get them out. And that perspective also has sort of gone into the mental health universe too. And dealing with people over long periods of time, many years, and helping them graduate to being helpers themselves is a much better perspective. Because a lot of people who have some experience with mental illness, as Rabbi Cohn said, and people have talked about, can eventually become some of the most experienced and wise helpers that there are because they've been there. So looking at it from a long-term perspective and developing some way of helping people graduate from being in an acute situation to learning tools to deal with the mental illness issues to becoming helpers. It's the kind of AA model even, that people in the AA world become helpers to people who are newcomers. And that needs to happen in the mental health universe also, and in the congregational world, I think.
Jed, as you were talking, I was thinking about the culture of individualism as well. And that's one way that our congregations kind of break. We become countercultural because we are intentionally creating communities. And the culture of individualism will tell you, don't get help, don't reach out, don't help others, lift yourself up from your bootstraps. And it's so awful for anybody and for people with mental health issues.
Any other comments about barriers or ways of overcoming barriers? There was some mention of languaging in Rabbi Cohn's presentation. How do you call your support groups? Do you call them mental well-being support groups? Do you call them mental health support groups? Mental illness?
Well, we call our support group a spiritual support group for mental health and wellness, and try to emphasize the wellness part of it.
Yeah, very good.
We call ours Refuat Hanefesh, healing of the spirit. So that's universally applicable, I think.
Yeah.
We don't have one right now, so
Okay.
I can't remember back to what we called it.
Do you have a name for these support groups that you gather for individuals that are temporarily affected, or?
I think we call them our pastoral care teams.
Okay.
Yeah, we create a little team around someone.
Okay, yeah. Great. So that helps make it a little neutral, and people still find themselves thinking that must be the mental illness group. So you're going to have to keep reminding people that wellness is the point. How do we see our broader community organizing to meet the stigma of mental illness, helping people to be more helpful and supportive to those with mental health crises? We had a presentation today to help educate people. Is there anything else that we might do as individuals, as communities?
I really think you should talk about this, but one of the powers of Together Colorado, which we operate a lot on a legislative arena, is legislatures like the fact that we are based, or our basis is faith communities. And I think it tells me something about the power that as faith communities we can have to make change.
Yeah, some of the statistics around access to mental health resources in Colorado is, it's shameful, really shameful. And so, I cannot say enough about, the legislative session is going on now. Find out what those bills are to get more money into mental health. Beds, inpatient beds is so low in this country, and our suicide rates are so high. My congregation is now organizing around the Safe to Tell program, which has this lovely veneer around it. It's an anonymous Safe to Tell, but having been the recipient of a Safe to Tell call and hearing stories from congregants, it's not very effective to have a police officer show up at your house and say, I'm here with Safe to Tell because somebody thought, da-da-da-da, and then my child said, nope. And the police officer said, oh, okay, and walked away. And that was it. So if we are going to have a program, let's really understand how it can be an effective program. And so we're doing some organizing around that. But to really listen to people about what are the key things that are the barriers for them to getting the services that they want on a systemic level. No kidding. Exactly. We don't have enough yet. And if you have nice health insurance, inpatient is still unbelievably expensive. And if you have my child had a 72-hour hold, and it was the worst experience of his life. Do you think he ever wants to do anything like that again? Ever? So there's so much systemically. Yes?
We've heard more and more often of having mental health crisis response teams respond to more mental health related issues than police.
They're doing that more and more, but that's also a funding issue. When I called about it in my town in Lafayette, it was 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or something.
that
So
makes
like
a
if
lot
you have
of-
a crisis, and when you might have a crisis later at night, you're going to get officers. And I've had 2 people come to my house. One was an officer event, which was awful, which led to the 72-hour hold.
In my experience, a lot of police don't seem to take the profession of a police officer because they're compassionate people per se.
Exactly.
I mean, there's some in every bunch, but a lot of them are just in it for the paycheck or the sense of authority, or the list goes on. But, a lot are just exactly that. Oh, there's no problem here. There's nothing. If you say there's no problem, then I won't get I won't get written up for it. So have a good night.
Exactly. And also, I am a white woman in a middle-class home. You walk into a decent, it's messy, but, it's not trashed. All of those things that go into also how I believe my family was responded to.
Comments, questions, Bill?
Could you explain more how the spiritual component works? I imagine you would concentrate on beliefs everyone in that a congregation has, but maybe there's some that don't have that. So how do you deal with that?
Do you want to take my mic? It's coming back.
Right. We have a ritual, and some people even object to that, but we start by lighting a candle or closing the door. We also read our guidelines, and we read those every single meeting, even if people have been there for a long time, because I think that's a sense of settling in and reminding people of why we're there. When we have met only in person, we did close the door. And again, the thought or imagery behind that was that makes it a safe place to be. And then we would light a candle, and maybe someone would say something about why they're there, or what they're thankful for, whatever's on their mind. And then at the end of the group, we usually went around and said, what was important to you tonight in a word or two? And then I usually close with some kind of reading, a poem. So it's real hard for me to pray in church now because I'm so used to not saying God or Jesus or anything like that. But again, it's a way to send people off. And when we've met in person, we blow out the candle and usually say it's not because we're extinguishing the light, but we're taking it with us. So it's a very small amount of time.
Something to add, Jed?
Yeah, something minor. So once upon a time, I was sitting here in this congregation, and the room was maybe 60% full. And Rabbi Green, who's the rabbi here at Har HaShem, asked the congregation, how many people here believe in God? And about half the people raised their hands. And he said, how many people don't believe in God? And about the other half of people raised their hands. And so the congregation of this place here are not universally connected to God as the source of spirituality. So I personally have tend to think about it as more sacredness and the connectedness of all things, and that how we influence each other, and nature influences us, and we influence the atmosphere of this planet, and so on, that there's a connectedness in the universe. And so that's how I personally deal with it. And I think that relates to the group, that the connectedness of the group and the people in the group connecting to their environment and their other people and to their cats and dogs and whoever they can connect to is sort of the essence of the spirituality. So that's how we dealt with that.
I have to jump in. There's a little kind of segue from what you just said, Jed, because I do know that here probably 100% of those that are here do believe that there is a crisis on mental health in this country. And so if you're going to vote the percentage, I think that we all are in some way to have to deal with that. Well, we've come to the point to end today, and I am just so pleased with the panel particularly, because you're grounding what it is that we believe in the practice of what you do believe. And of course, Rabbi Sandy, what a fantastic presence here, and your being here. We want to thank you very, very much. Very, very much. It's true. Very, very true. Very, very true. So I want to say that we do have a couple of, I want to affirm again the sponsors here, the Hope Coalition for Boulder County, Atonement Lutheran Church, and First Congregational Church were financially supporters of our program today. We're going to thank them as well. Hope Coalition did bring their resources, and I know that Babu, who is the president of NAMI Colorado, is here as well. And so glad that you are here and brought your resources. We're about to end. So, okay. This is the segue. Go for it.
Yeah, I know. So, on behalf of the NAMI Colorado Board of Directors, I would like to thank INME for what you're doing, and also thank all the panelists here. Rabbi Cohen sits on our board of directors, so she's precious for us. And I just wanted to tell what we are into in the days to come. NAMI is a totally secular organization, but our mission is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion based on cultural humility and cultural competence. Speak the language and be competent about it. Know who you are talking to. And also this roadmap is to meet people where they are. Because we are affirming that you matter. We see you. And we're not stopping there. That we're going to walk alongside you. We are just a few in NAMI. We need each one of you to do that. At NAMI, we believe that the interfaith communities should be the frontline responders in a crisis, mental health crisis. Of course, I know I'm preaching to the choir, speaking to this congregation, but that's what we believe. So if any, there is a saying that if any church becomes a program church, that it dies there. We at NAMI, although we are secular, we believe in the power of spirituality. That's a component that gives you hope. The day the hope dies, you're no more. So we are also in the business of saving lives. How do we do that? That's where we say we need the community connections, where we tell the spiritual, the